Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs, the newsman. It's Thanksgiving week, and I'm feeling very thankful for all of you who subscribe and watch this show. Because if it weren't for you, I'd have to get a real job. U.S. State Department officials are confident that the Israeli War Cabinet will approve a pending ceasefire deal to end over a year of fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon. But as we've seen over and over again, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a habit of scuttling peace deals, and it looks like he's trying to sink this one too. As of this recording, the proposal was being reviewed by the Israeli War Cabinet. Netanyahu has previously said that any agreement must also allow for Israel to renew attacks on Lebanon if it deems necessary, which kind of defeats the purpose of a ceasefire. Despite the closeness of a deal, Israel continued hammering Lebanon with bombs overnight and into the morning. More than 30 were killed in Israeli airstrikes across southern Lebanon and Beirut. That brings the official death toll in Lebanon to over 3,700 people, and more than 1 million in the south have been displaced. Far-right Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is calling for the ceasefire proposal to be defeated. At the same time, there's still no progress toward a ceasefire in Gaza, where the Israeli military is maintaining its ethnic cleansing campaign. That's even after the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for the war crime of intentionally starving the population of Gaza. Over the weekend, the foreign policy chief of the European Union, Josep Borrell, reminded member states what their obligations are following the ICC's decision. They need to arrest Netanyahu. Borrell told Reuters in an interview, quote, the states who signed the Rome Convention are obliged to implement the decision of the court. It is not optional. You are not a member of the court and then you decide not to implement the decision of the court. You can withdraw and say, I am no longer a member of this, but it is an obligation for a member state. A number of EU member states have said they would execute an arrest warrant on Netanyahu and Gallant, including the Netherlands, Ireland, Belgium, Spain, Austria, and Slovenia. Others have yet to commit to an arrest, including the UK, Germany, Czechia, Italy, and France. Hungary, which is led by a far-right government, said it would defy the ICC, that it wouldn't take action against Netanyahu, and would in fact invite him to visit the country. Israel is still welcomed among the community of fascist heads of state. Speaking of which, here in the U.S., protests against the Biden administration's Gaza policy have dropped off significantly at U.S. colleges thanks to heavy-handed free speech suppression tactics. Here is the New York Times reporting on the new chill that permeates around college campuses. Quote, universities have seen just 950 protest events this semester so far, compared to 3,000 last semester. When students have protested this fall, administrators have often enforced, to the letter, new rules created in response to last spring's unrest. The moves have created scenes that would have been hard to imagine previously, particularly at universities that once celebrated their history of student activism. The paper went on to provide some examples. Quote, Harvard temporarily banned dozens of students and faculty members from libraries after they participated in silent study-ins. At Indiana University, Bloomington, some students and faculty members who attended candlelight vigils were referred for discipline under a new prohibition on expressive activity after 11 p.m. University of Pennsylvania administrators and campus police officers holding zip ties told vigil attendees to move because they had not reserved the space in compliance with new rules. So this is another legacy of the Biden presidency. He oversaw an unprecedented crackdown on free speech on college campuses just before Donald Trump took over with a unified Republican government. Thanks a lot, Joe. Mail workers are fighting class war on both sides of the US-Canadian border. There's still no resolution in a general strike that's pretty much shut down the Canadian postal system. About 55,000 members of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers went on strike on November 15th, following a year of negotiations that failed to result in a fair labor contract. The current deal on the table provides for an 11.5% wage increase for current workers and preserves their defined benefit pensions. But the union is fighting on behalf of future workers as well, who Canada Post wants to withhold benefits from for a year and deny pensions to altogether. Also, the proposed wage increases do little to help workers get ahead of the inflation that's already significantly eaten into their purchasing power. According to labor notes, the picket lines have been unifying and workers have been enjoying themselves with karaoke. There are also shows of solidarity with American mail carriers who are locked in their own class struggle. Both workers are facing similar circumstances, mostly manufactured fiscal crises within their respective mail systems, ones that could be resolved by diversifying their postal activities, including implementing things like postal banking. But instead of pursuing those reforms, neoliberal forces want to see labor shoulder the brunt of sacrifices. Hence the labor unrest we're now seeing. In the US, the National Association of Letter Carriers is also fighting for a better contract and has been for more than a year. Unlike in Canada, where just one union represents all mail workers, in the US, it's 4 different unions, with the letter carriers being the largest. The current contract offer includes an insulting 1.3% raise. Just 1.3% at a time when we're seeing workers all over the economy go on strike and snag 20, 30, 40% wage increases. The key words there, going on strike, because in the US, unlike in Canada, mail workers are not allowed to go on strike. Instead, labor disputes are settled in forced arbitration. So really, the 1.3% offer is just what the post office plans to take to the table during arbitration, assuming mail carriers vote down the tentative agreement. While mail workers can go on strike in Canada, they can also be forced back to work by the government. So far, there doesn't appear to be votes in Parliament to do that. But Prime Minister Trudeau could invoke emergency powers to force arbitration to end the strike, which the Labor Ministry already did this year to wind down pickets among port workers. Canada Post estimated that the strike has delayed delivery of more than 10 million parcels. Yikes. Better give those workers a fair deal to get the system back moving again. Well, I guess he wriggled his way out of it. Donald Trump's election win effectively ends the federal cases against him and ensures he actually won't face any punishment for attempting to steal the 2020 election. Nothing for hatching a scheme to name fake electors or urging Republican officials in Georgia to find enough votes to put him over the top, or for sending a mob of supporters to the Capitol to disrupt the official electoral vote count. Nope, nothing for any of that. DOJ Special Counsel Jack Smith announced Monday he was winding down both the election subversion case and the mishandling of classified documents case against Trump. That's not due to a lack of evidence or anything, but instead because existing Department of Justice policy prohibits a sitting president from being prosecuted, which is a uniquely American feature of our government that doesn't exist in a lot of other developed countries where heads of state are subject to the law and do not levitate above it. That doesn't mean Trump getting away with everything was inevitable. No, it required a special sort of incompetence and disregard by the Democrats to make it happen. Namely, two people, Attorney General Merrick Garland and U.S. Senator Chris Coons. First, as Attorney General, Garland was too much of a coward, a norms guy, to pursue a case against Trump for the January 6th riot in his attempts to overturn the election. Garland waited until late 2022 to appoint a special counsel, which, as we know now, was too late. It allowed Trump to run the clock out, preventing any resolution of the cases before the 2024 election. And you can bet whoever Trump gets in as his attorney general won't give the same deference to Trump's perceived political opponents. But all of the blame doesn't fall on Garland. Senate Democrats share a lot of it too, because in the weeks after January 6, 2021, they had a real chance to impeach and convict Trump and bar him from running for political office again. But instead of conducting a fulsome impeachment trial that included witnesses and uncovered evidence of Trump's plans to steal the election that wouldn't become public for years later, Democrats ran a sham process with no witnesses, all so that Senator Christopher Coons could return home early for the Valentine's Day recess. Here was Politico reporting at the time on what happened after Democrats won a key vote to call witnesses for the impeachment trial. Quote, Coons pressed House Democrats to relent, saying their quest for witnesses would cost them Republican votes to convict and maybe even some Democrats. The jury is ready to vote, Coons told the managers, according to a senior House Democratic aide. People want to get home for Valentine's Day, Coons said. And with that, the impeachment trial ended early with no witnesses called and no new evidence uncovered. Trump was not convicted, paving the way for him to run for president again 4 years later. So we're all stuck with another round of Trump, but at least Senator Chris Coons had a nice date night with his dang wife. The annual UN climate conference wrapped up in Baku, Azerbaijan over the weekend, and the agreement struck by wealthier nations at the end of the conference was panned as insufficient, even a death sentence for millions, according to climate groups. The main issue for negotiators this year was how much should rich nations that are responsible for most of the planet's warming emissions, like the United States and the European Union, contribute to developing countries that stand to lose the most in a hotter planet. A lot of funding is required to not just protect countries, especially small island nations, from rising seas and freak weather, but also to help them leapfrog fossil fuels. A coalition of these countries called for $1.3 trillion annually in assistance, with the money being raised by governments and private polluters. Instead, what they're getting is $300 billion a year, raised from a variety of sources, including some in the form of loans from international finance institutions that will, according to Oil Change International, create, quote, debt traps for countries most vulnerable to the climate crisis. This is also assuming wealthier countries even live up to these paltry obligations. Back in 2009, they all committed to spending $100 billion a year by 2020 and failed to meet that target. A delegation of African countries said that this year's agreements were, quote, too little, too late. And the delegation from Cuba slammed it as a form of environmental colonialism and said that polluting countries are evading their moral and legal responsibilities under the Paris Climate Agreement. Paris aimed to restrain global warming to only 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial averages, a number the planet is likely to break through within the next decade. Last month, the United Nations released a report tracking government's progress on this, and it found that based on current efforts, global warming will blow past the 1.5 degrees limit and warm to 2.9 degrees Celsius by 2100. Next year, countries are expected to release revised plans to reduce carbon emissions, though there isn't much hope around the world for a bold plan from the US, which will be under the leadership of Donald Trump, who doesn't even believe climate change is real. While the developing world and climate activists deem this year's proceedings a failure, the delegation from Azerbaijan, which was enveloped in a scandal for using the conference to broker oil deals, hailed it as a great success. It and the rest of the negotiators applauded themselves after the deal was reached. Next year's conference will also be held in another petrol state, Brazil. Where it should be held, though, is Tuvalu, country literally sinking into the water due to climate change. That way, if oil lobbyists want to use the conference to strike deals, they're going to have to do it knee-deep in seawater. Okay, friends, the show ends with a sunrise from Missouri, the old show me state. It was sent in by Lauren in St. Louis. Enjoy. Thank you, Lauren. Show's over. Thank you for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV. It's a great time to do it right now with our Black Friday sale going on. 50% off all annual memberships and merchandise. 50% off. You can't beat that. We're not here trying to make money. We're here to spread anti-capitalist propaganda. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels and follow us on social media. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. Except for the rest of the week, the team has it off for Thanksgiving. So, I'll see you next week.